I never thought I'd hear a number put on my children like they were a settlement item on a spreadsheet. The message came in at 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. No greeting, no explanation. Just a demand, written clean and confident, with a dollar amount so high I actually laughed out loud at first, until I realized she was serious. She said it was for the kids. She always said it was for the kids. That's when I knew this wasn't about support anymore. This was about control. If you've ever been backed into a corner by someone who knows exactly which words to use to make you feel small, stay with me. This story doesn't end the way she expected. My name is Daniel. When my ex and I divorced, we promised each other one thing. Whatever happened between us, the kids would never be used as leverage. For a while, we actually kept that promise. But promises change when money enters the room. She started small at first. Extra requests, new expenses, emergencies that somehow always landed on my paycheck. I paid without arguing because I didn't want conflict, and because I thought that was what good fathers did. Then the tone changed. The messages got sharper. The numbers got bigger. And one morning she sent the demand that finally made me stop breathing for a second. She wanted a lump sum, a fortune really, up front. No discussion, no compromise, just a deadline and the reminder that a judge would understand. That was the moment I stopped apologizing. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew whatever I said next would set everything in motion. For years, I'd been the easy one, the reasonable one, the parent who paid early and never asked for receipts. I told myself I was protecting the kids from tension, but deep down, I was avoiding a fight I didn't think I could win. She knew that. She also knew my biggest weakness, guilt. Anytime I hesitated, she brought up school, activities, college someday. She framed every demand as a test of love, and every objection as proof I was failing it. This time was different. The number she asked for wasn't just aggressive, it was impossible. And more than that, it was sloppy. It told me she assumed I'd panic, cave, and figure it out later. Instead, I called my lawyer. I hadn't spoken to him in years. I almost felt embarrassed dialing the number, like I was admitting I'd lost control of something I should have handled myself. He listened quietly as I explained the message, the demand, the deadline. Then he asked a question that caught me off guard. Did she mention why now? She hadn't. That was the first crack. Over the next few days, I started seeing things I'd ignored before. The sudden urgency, the confidence, the way she spoke like the outcome was already decided. People don't push that hard unless they think they're holding all the cards. What she didn't realize was that I'd been holding something too. Not as a weapon, not intentionally. Just a detail I'd never needed, until now. And once I saw it clearly, I understood why this was about to blow up in ways neither of us could walk back. I didn't sleep much after that realization settled in. Not because I was afraid of losing money, but because I finally understood the shift. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was pressure, calculated and timed, and it meant something had changed on her side long before she sent that message. The next morning I read her demand again, slowly this time. I paid attention to what she said and what she didn't. There was no breakdown of expenses, no mention of new needs for the kids, no explanation at all, just a clean figure and a quiet threat wrapped in polite language. I forwarded it to my lawyer. He called me an hour later. "She's anchoring high," he said calmly. "That usually means she's either desperate or she thinks you won't push back." I stared out the window while he talked. I could see my car parked crooked in the driveway, the same way it had been for years. I'd always been bad at details. She used to joke about that when we were married. Now I wondered how many times that joke had turned into an assumption. My lawyer asked me to walk him through the original custody and support agreement, line by line. I hadn't looked at it in a long time. I trusted it was there, doing its job quietly, like I trusted most things I didn't want to think about. As we talked, something strange happened. He went quiet. Then he asked me to slow down. "Read that part again," he said. I did. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. There was a clause I'd forgotten completely, not hidden, not complicated, just unused. It covered extraordinary financial demands outside the agreed framework. Large lump sum requests required disclosure, justification, and mutual consent, or they triggered a review process. I remembered signing it years ago without much thought. It felt like boilerplate at the time, something lawyers added to make documents thicker. Turns out it mattered. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means she can't do what she's trying to do, he said. Not like this. And if she pushes it to court, she opens doors she may not want opened. That sentence stayed with me all day. I didn't reply to her message. I didn't counter. I didn't explain. Silence was new, and she felt it almost immediately. By that evening, my phone lit up again. This time, the tone was different, sharper, less polished. She accused me of stalling, of playing games, of punishing the kids because I was bitter. I read it twice and put the phone down. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. Over the next few days, the pressure escalated. She started calling instead of texting. When I didn't answer, she left voicemails. Long ones, emotional ones. She talked about stress, about fear, about how hard things had been for her lately. She never once asked how I was doing. I started to notice patterns. She'd push hard, then soften. Threaten, then plead. It was a rhythm I'd danced to for years without realizing it. This time I stayed still. My lawyer advised me to let her make the next formal move. If she wanted to involve the court, she'd have to put everything on record. Income, expenses, timing, all of it. And that's when the cracks widened. She filed a motion. It wasn't for the full amount she'd demanded originally. It was lower. Still high, but noticeably scaled back. That alone told me something had shifted. People don't retreat unless they've run into resistance. When I read through the filing, my stomach tightened. Not from fear, but from recognition. She cited upcoming obligations, commitments, projects that didn't quite line up with what I knew about her life. Dates overlapped. Numbers didn't match. I flagged it for my lawyer. He didn't sound surprised. This happens more than you think, he said. When someone assumes the other side won't look too closely. I started looking closely. For the first time since the divorce, I pulled bank statements, old emails, calendar entries. I wasn't digging for dirt. I was looking for context. What I found wasn't explosive on its own, no single smoking gun, just inconsistencies, gaps, a timeline that leaned too heavily on urgency without explanation. Then I found something small that tied it all together. An email, months old, buried in a thread I'd ignored. She'd mentioned a business opportunity she was considering. At the time, I'd skimmed past it. It didn't involve me, so I didn't engage. Now the dates lined up perfectly. The demand, the deadline, the confidence. It wasn't about the kids. It never was. She wasn't asking me to support our children. She was asking me to fund her next move without scrutiny, without accountability, and without resistance. Realizing that didn't make me angry. It made me calm. Because once you understand the motive, the fear loses its grip. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse her of anything. I let the process move forward, slowly, deliberately, exactly the way it's designed to. Her messages grew shorter, less certain. She asked if we could talk this out like adults. I agreed, but only with lawyers present. The meeting was tense but polite. She stuck to her story. I stuck to the agreement. My lawyer asked careful questions. She answered most of them. Not all. When the meeting ended, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Balance. For years, I'd believed that keeping the peace meant giving in. That protecting my kids meant absorbing every hit quietly. Standing my ground felt foreign, almost selfish. But as I drove home, I realized something important. This wasn't escalation. This was correction. And whether she liked it or not, the story was no longer unfolding on her terms alone. The court date landed on my calendar like a quiet threat. Not dramatic, not urgent. Just a line of text sitting there, reminding me that whatever illusion of control she thought she had was now being tested in a room where stories don't matter nearly as much as records do. In the days leading up to it, she tried a new angle. She stopped accusing and started reminiscing. Messages came in late at night. She talked about how hard the divorce had been, how she never imagined things would turn so cold between us, how she thought we were better than this. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't feel it, but because I finally understood the pattern. When pressure failed, she reached for emotion. When emotion failed, she'd reach for fear again. I stayed quiet and let my lawyer do the talking. He asked me to prepare something I'd never done before. A clean timeline, income, payments, extras, everything I'd contributed beyond what was required. It took hours, receipts, bank transfers, notes scribbled in margins from years ago. By the time I was done, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about proving I was a good father. That had already been proven. This was about exposing a false narrative. In court, she looked confident at first. Calm, composed, like someone who'd rehearsed the story enough times to believe it herself. She spoke about rising costs, about instability, about how she was just trying to secure the children's future. I listened without reacting. Then my lawyer stood. He didn't argue. He didn't accuse. He asked questions. Simple ones. When did these expenses begin? Why now? Why a lump sum instead of adjustments through the agreed framework? She answered smoothly at first, then slower, then with phrases like "I don't recall" and "I'd have to check." That's when the documents came out. The agreement, the clause, the payments I'd made beyond obligation, the inconsistencies between her filing and her actual timeline. The room changed. Not loudly, just enough to feel. The judge asked her directly why the extraordinary request hadn't followed the required disclosure process. She hesitated. Not long, but long enough. She said she thought it didn't apply. The judge didn't raise his voice. He just nodded and said, "It does." I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in months. Then came the moment that cracked everything open. My lawyer referenced the email I'd found, the one about the business opportunity. He didn't accuse her of misuse. He simply asked whether the timing of her demand coincided with that planned investment. She denied it immediately, too quickly. The judge asked her to clarify. She changed her answer. That was it. People think courtrooms explode when things go wrong. They don't. They get very quiet. Silence settles in, heavy and final, and everyone knows a line has been crossed. The judge ordered a full financial review. Not of me, of her. Her accounts, her disclosures, her claims. The hearing ended shortly after that. No ruling yet, just a process set in motion that couldn't be stopped. Outside the courtroom, she didn't look at me. Her lawyer did, and the look on his face told me everything. The review took weeks. During that time, she stopped messaging altogether. No late-night reflections, no guilt-laced updates, nothing. I focused on my kids. I cooked dinner when they were with me, helped with homework, took them to practice, normal things, grounding things. And slowly, the anxiety faded. When the results came back, they weren't explosive in the way movies make them seem. No handcuffs, no shouting. Just a formal acknowledgement that her request was unsupported, improperly framed, and inconsistent with her financial position. The judge denied the motion, but he didn't stop there. He warned her. Clear language, no ambiguity. Any future attempt to leverage the children for extraordinary financial demands without proper basis would carry consequences. She was ordered to cover her own legal costs. Mine too. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Weeks later, she reached out again. Short message, neutral tone. She suggested we reset and move forward amicably. I agreed. On my terms. We adjusted communication boundaries. Everything went through a parenting app. No late-night messages, no side conversations, no emotional leverage. She complied, because now she understood something she hadn't before. I wasn't the easy one anymore. Standing my ground didn't damage my kids. It protected them. It showed them that love doesn't mean surrender, and responsibility doesn't mean silence. I didn't win money. I won clarity. And sometimes that's the most expensive thing someone can try to take from you, until you refuse to give it up. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, the way real consequences usually do. At first, nothing looked different. The schedule stayed the same. The custody exchanges were polite, almost stiff. Messages stayed inside the parenting app, short and factual, stripped of emotion. But underneath that surface calm, something had shifted permanently. People don't talk much about what happens after court, when no one is watching anymore. There's no gavel, no speeches, just the slow realization that a power dynamic has collapsed and isn't coming back. I noticed it in small moments. She stopped suggesting changes, stopped making assumptions, stopped speaking like decisions were already made. Every request came carefully now, almost cautiously, and for the first time since the divorce, I wasn't bracing myself every time my phone buzzed. What surprised me most wasn't her behavior, it was my own. I'd spent years thinking firmness would make me colder, that standing my ground would harden me in ways my kids might feel. Instead, the opposite happened. I was calmer, more present. When you're not constantly defending yourself, you have energy for better things. The kids felt it too. They didn't know the details, and they didn't need to. But they noticed the absence of tension, the way conversations stopped feeling rushed, the way I wasn't distracted during dinner anymore. One night, my oldest asked a simple question. "Are you okay now?" I paused before answering. "Yeah," I said, "I am." And I meant it. A few months later, the ripple effects reached further than I expected. I heard through mutual acquaintances that her business opportunity hadn't worked out. Not because of the court review directly, but because scrutiny changes things. Investors ask questions. Partners hesitate. Timelines stretch. When you're used to moving fast on borrowed confidence, being forced to slow down can derail everything. She never mentioned it to me. She didn't have to. I saw it in the way she stopped posturing, in the way she started asking instead of demanding, in the way she avoided eye contact during exchanges, not out of shame, but recalibration. The narrative she'd built no longer worked. And here's the part no one warns you about. When you remove yourself from someone's leverage, they don't just lose control over you. They lose a version of themselves they were invested in believing. That creates distance, necessary distance. We weren't friends. We never would be again. But we became something more stable, predictable. There were no more surprise deadlines, no dramatic ultimatums, no guilt dressed up as concern. Everything moved through process, and process is neutral. I started saying no when it made sense to say no, yes when it mattered. Neither felt like a moral referendum anymore, just decisions. One afternoon, months later, she sent a message that caught me off guard. Not a request, not a complaint, an apology. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't detailed. Just a few lines acknowledging that she'd crossed a line and that she'd handled things badly. I read it twice. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt relieved. I replied simply. I accepted it, without reopening anything, without revisiting the past. Some doors don't need to be walked through again, even when they're unlocked. After that, communication settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. The kids thrived in that stability. Grades improved, behavior softened, they laughed more freely. It reinforced something important for me. Conflict doesn't damage children nearly as much as unresolved imbalance does. Kids don't need one parent to absorb everything quietly so the other can stay comfortable. They need boundaries. They need consistency. They need to see that fairness exists, even when it's uncomfortable. I used to think standing my ground would make me the villain in someone else's story. Maybe it did. But that stopped mattering, because the version of me who stayed silent out of fear wasn't protecting anyone. He was just teaching everyone involved that pressure works. That lesson is expensive. I stopped teaching it. The last unexpected consequence came quietly, almost unnoticed. I stopped being angry. Not all at once, but steadily. When you're no longer being pushed, resentment doesn't have anything to lean on. It fades. Not into forgiveness, necessarily, but into indifference. And indifference is freedom. Looking back, the demand that started everything feels almost surreal now. The number, the confidence, the assumption that I'd fold. She didn't know she was forcing me into the one position I'd never occupied before. Equal footing. Standing my ground didn't blow up my family. It stabilized it. And once stability exists, manipulation has nowhere to land. I didn't realize how much of my life had been shaped by reaction until there was nothing left to react to. When things finally settled, truly settled, there was a strange quiet that followed. No alerts, no sudden demands, no emotional spikes disguised as emergencies. Just space. That space forced me to look at myself in a way I hadn't before. For years, I'd defined good parenting as endurance, absorbing pressure, paying more, saying less. I thought sacrifice meant silence, and that if I stayed calm long enough, fairness would eventually arrive on its own. It doesn't work like that. Fairness doesn't drift in naturally. It shows up when boundaries are enforced. The biggest change wasn't in my ex. It was in how I carried myself. I stopped preemptively explaining, stopped softening every decision, stopped acting like every no required a justification, and nothing collapsed. In fact, things improved. The kids adjusted to the new normal quickly. They didn't ask why certain things changed. They just accepted that life felt steadier, less tense, more predictable. One afternoon, while helping with homework, my youngest said something that stayed with me. "You don't look tired all the time anymore." That sentence hit harder than anything said in court. I realized how much they'd been watching, quietly absorbing the weight I thought I was hiding. Standing my ground hadn't just protected me. It had changed the atmosphere they were growing up in. Months later, there was one final test. She sent a request through the app. Reasonable, documented, well within the agreement. The kind of thing that years earlier would have come with subtext and pressure. I approved it without hesitation. That's the part people misunderstand. Standing your ground doesn't mean becoming rigid. It means choosing freely instead of being cornered. There was no drama after that, no follow-up, no passive aggression, just acceptance. That's when I knew it was over. Not the relationship that ended long ago. The imbalance. Looking back, the explosion she'd predicted never really happened. No public meltdown, no scorched earth. No one stormed out of the courtroom in tears. What blew up was the assumption that fear was enough to control the outcome. And once that assumption died, everything else rearranged itself naturally. I don't tell this story because I won. I tell it because I finally stopped losing quietly. If you're watching this and you're in a similar place, here's what I wish someone had told me earlier. Standing your ground doesn't make you selfish. It makes you clear. Clarity changes conversations. Conversations change behavior. Behavior changes outcomes. And sometimes the most powerful move you can make is simply refusing to be rushed by someone else's urgency. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt pressure disguised as love or guilt disguised as responsibility, take a moment to subscribe to Revenge Reels. These stories aren't about revenge for the sake of revenge. They're about balance, boundaries, and the quiet justice that comes when people stop backing down. There are more stories like this coming. Different lives, different betrayals, different turning points. And the next one starts with a decision that seems small, until it isn't. I'll see you there.